Good morning, everyone. The fallout from the ombudsman's testimony is still falling out, and no cabinet shuffle yet. I thought we would see a quick cabinet shuffle. We may see one next week. I don't know. We'll see. With Saijan being kind of thrown under the bus by the ombudsman, and these news stories leaking out, more intelligent people than me are saying that it looks like he may be out. But who knows? Who knows? As far as I've seen, the PMO in the Prime Minister's office has said that they maintain confidence in Saijan, but here's a National Post article. Military ombudsman was totally cut off from Saijan after raising Vance allegations in 2018, MPs here. So there's all sorts of missteps. In 2018, when Vance and Trudeau were crucifying Mark Norman for building the asterisks, how dare you not use Irving, this is going on. Weird. Right? I think it's interesting, right? Like, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear anything bad about Vance. We don't want to detract from that Mark Norman investigation. They did want to detract from that whole thing, right? They did. They really did. Very, very interesting. Speaking of, this is interesting. Here is the Wee brothers, and via their lawyer, they have decided they are going to defy a parliamentary summons. Okay, so we have great respect for our parliamentarians and the important work of the committee. That said, we advise with regret that our clients will not appear before the committee, whether in answer to a summons or otherwise. Sorry, we're not going to answer questions we don't like. Nope, sorry, not happening. We won't be talking about anything to do with that. Like I said the other day, they had an opportunity to get the RCMP involved, and that opportunity was gleefully prorogued. Right, by Justin Trudeau. Now we've got to close the investigation. We've got to close everything because reasons, right? Because reasons, and we have to have an election because those conservatives gummed up all the bills, right? They gummed up all the bills. All they want to do is talk. So we've got to have an election. And don't worry, Huawei will run the communications for Aaron O'Toole. We'll get to that. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so Charlie Angus says, the lawyer for the Kielburger brothers states they will not accept a legal summons from Parliament to testify. Not sure if this refusal includes their chief financial officer, Victor Lee. This defiance of a parliamentary study is almost without precedent. What do you think should be done if somebody says, if you get summonsed, if you get ordered by a court to come and testify, can you just say no? My lawyer says, I don't think so. So you've been summoned to come and testify in this fraud thing, right? By this court. No. Does that work? Don't you get arrested if you do that? Like, isn't there some kind of like, if you don't show up, then this will happen? I don't know what happens in this situation. This defiance of a parliamentary study is almost without precedent. So, sorry about your luck. We're not answering questions we don't like. Right? Cover-up alert. Law clerks reveal that the government did not reveal all WE scandal documents Finance Committee ordered released in summer, and that the government is blacking out information it claims is not relevant. We don't answer questions we don't like. See this WE thing? It's done. Why is it done? Same reason you're locked in your home, because we say so. That's it. Deal with it, right? That's it. There's no. What they're doing is just ignoring you. If you come at them with a great question, they will look past you and smile, close their book, and walk away. And you're left standing there saying, "Hey, what studies are being used to say masking children does anything beneficial? What studies have been used to study the developmental delays being imposed on our children by mandatory masking in play schools, preschools, and primary grades, K to 6, right?" And they just smile and they look at you and they close their book and they walk away, right? And it's public. Having the public aware of that is important, right? But they don't answer questions they don't like. How do you fight that, right? Especially when the establishment, the place that's supposed to hold people accountable, like if Parliament calls you and summons you and you say no, maybe the establishment should follow through. Maybe there should be a consequence for that, like arrest until or somebody goes and brings you and says, you're supposed to be here now, right? Like, and not kidnaps. I'm not advocating for kidnapping, but if somebody refuses something like that, maybe there should be a consequence, right? And so, anyway, here is the moving forward. This is budget. And the provinces yesterday all asked, so there's a federal budget coming. First federal budget since 2019. It's 2021. 700 days, over 700 days without a budget. That's all right. We fired the finance minister, Mr. Morneau, the experienced finance minister, probably the most experienced minister in the entire cabinet. They fired him and they put a journalist, now a Rhodes Scholar journalist, a very intelligent journalist, but if you've never done finances, right? Or if you're wanting to use, what's the capitalism that she wants to implement? Hold on, I have to look this up. Stakeholder capitalism. Okay, stakeholder capitalism. Here's Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland to speak at the Great Reset launch, right? And she's going to talk about Freeland will participate in an implementing stakeholder capitalism panel Tuesday evening that examines how investors and governments can work together to achieve stakeholder capitalism in the region. And I thought I'll look and see what stakeholder capitalism is exactly, just so I can relate to you what it is. And there's a nice big picture of Klaus Schwab, right? Klaus Schwab of Amazing Poly fame. And this is a Forbes article. It says, why stakeholder capitalism will fail. Let's just go through this really quick. Stakeholder capitalism, the notion that a firm focuses on meeting the needs of all its stakeholders, customers, employees, partners, the community, and society as a whole, is now on almost every top executive's list. Oh, doesn't that sound holistic and yummy, right? Like you're wrapped in a warm blanket of love and stakeholder capitalism, right? Stakeholder capitalism. Talk of stakeholder capitalism is now everywhere. It's the theme of the Davos Manifesto 2020. This is January 2020, by the way. Announced last month by Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman, in preparation for the World Economic Forum, where the world's top business executives will meet later this month in Davos, Switzerland. Okay, so that's last year. The origins of stakeholder capitalism. Yet stakeholder capitalism is not a new idea. It was launched by the 1932 management classic, The Modern Corporation and Private Property by Adolf A. Berle and Gardner C. Means. The idea was that public firms should have professional managers who would balance the claims of different stakeholders, taking into account public policy. For the next 40 years, it was the general approach of big business in the United States. When many big firms attempted to implement it over decades, the perpetual need throughout the organization to keep balancing conflicting claims among stakeholders led to mass confusion and what came to be known as garbage can organizations. This, in turn, eventually provoked a resort to MSV, the very thing for which big business is now being assailed. Now, this goes through what MSV is, and it's beyond the scope of what I'm trying to say here. But essentially, a Rhodes Scholar reporter who is being asked to come up with a budget is being begged by the premiers to give the premiers more healthcare money because we need more healthcare money because we're playing the COVID game. And the COVID game means, oh no, cases are up, so we got to spend more money, and healthy people have to go home, and we have absolutely no data to back up any of the interventions we're doing. We're just listening to these very conflicted public health officers. And I'll show you what I mean by conflicted public health officers later in the show. It's just wild. It's just wild what people are allowed to do. Okay, here's the question and answer about the premiers saying we need more health money, and budgetary secretary, I believe, saying D. LeBlanc here is saying that he's not a budgetary he's not a budget secretary. He is the president and private counsel of the Queen's Privy Council, a president of the Privy Council. Okay, so he's saying that's not necessarily going to happen. Why isn't a finance guy doing this? Anyway, here it is.
Bluntly, that Canadians' healthcare will suffer without your government increasing transfers to provinces. So let me ask you bluntly, will you do that in the upcoming federal budget?
We've said, Vashi, that we accept the need to increase federal transfers for world-class public health care. It's a value and a policy with which we agree entirely. So we share the Premier's focus on a world-class, accessible public healthcare system. We've also said that this is a period of enormous economic and public health uncertainty. We have transferred tens of billions of dollars to provinces and hundreds of billions of dollars to Canadians just in the last year in terms of support in the fight against COVID-19. We're prepared to continue to maintain that support. And we're also prepared to talk to the provinces about what an increased federal transfer to provinces and territories for healthcare would look like. But I don't think it's realistic for them to expect that that's going to happen in the next few weeks. And we've been very clear with them on
that. No. At least they answered the question, right? At least they answered the question. But that's interesting that they're not willing to play ball. So after almost 2 years of no budget, or 700 odd days of no budget, let's say, the answer is we don't have any more money for healthcare. That's tapped out. I mean, we're at the top anyway. We've got a $2 trillion debt, $1.8 billion debt, so much debt. It's just unbelievable, and it is something that is going to take effect. It takes a while to take effect, but it's going to take effect. I moved up the conflict of interest because I thought it fit better here. Here is Greg Tolan, and he says, nothing to see here other than the husband of Toronto's chief medical officer being a total shill for Big Pharma. I'm sure the fact that EP Davila has no other reason to keep Toronto in the lockdown in North America than public health and safety. Nothing at all. So Richard Choi is Dr. Davila's husband, and he's got research support from AstraZeneca and Bayer. I think Bayer owns Pfizer. And he's been speaking at AstraZeneca, Bayer, Boehringer, BMS, Pfizer, HLS, Novartis, Sanofi, and all sorts of places. So is there a monetary conflict of interest there? Ezra Levent seems to think so. He says, I double checked and it's true. The husband of Toronto's lockdown extremist public health officer, EP Davila, is a fully rented out pharmaceuticals man. Makes a lot more sense now. Every day the lockdown panic continues. They get a little bit richer. Interesting. Right? Interesting conflict of interest. And here's another conflict of interest. Sole source contract for ventilators to a former MP, and the MP's twice that they had to remove interim authorization so no further sales or deliveries could take place until the problems were resolved. Very interesting, right? Very interesting conflict of interest, very interesting money changing hands, people being kept in lockdowns, etc. And we are in a situation where it doesn't seem to matter. It doesn't seem to matter with regards to, like, you can tell an entire public health board that the choice you're making is enabling abuse from parents and teachers to children, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. You're the only people who can do anything about it. And they'll sit there and say nothing. They'll have an entire hour meeting and not mention it again. Crazy, right? Isn't that wild? And I think that it's an interesting comment on humanity, where we've got leaders who are more interested in virtue signaling about race than they are about dealing with the actual abuse that's happening in every single school to every single child, because nobody has the ability to say to the public health people or the people in charge of this is not acceptable, this doesn't help. And if you think it helps, show us why you think it helps. Because I can't see anything that says masking is a good use of fabric for children in schools developmentally. Anyway, regardless of all of that, it's incredible. It's incredible. Okay, moving back into the reason that the conflict of interest was later is because I'm going to talk about COVID later, but I thought we'd talk about politics here. So the conflict is interesting in that it relates to the budget that we were talking about there, but back to governing in the strictest sense. Spencer Fernando points out that the Conservative Party hired a former Huawei Canada vice president. Okay, so he worked for Huawei. He's a VP of Huawei. Interesting, right? Like, it seems, and that's not popular. That's not a great choice. Spencer Fernando says, it seems that the Conservative Party brass consistently ask themselves, what would our members like us to do? And then they do the opposite, which I think that's very, very true. Peter McIsaac says, Aaron O'Toole deletes the Conservative petition to ban Huawei after party hires ex-Huawei VP. Interesting. Spencer Fernando again, he says, link to the Conservative petition to ban Huawei now shows 404 not found. So they've taken it down. Interesting, right? And this is Ezra Levent as well. Ezra's got pointing this out. There's two Ezra tweets that I'll highlight. This is the one that Spencer's reacting to. Ezra says, breaking, Aaron O'Toole just deleted his party's petition to ban Huawei. It used to be here. He deleted it, but I took a screenshot. Just days ago, O'Toole hired Huawei's VP to run the Conservative war room. But run it for whom? Canada or Huawei? And here's another Ezra tweet. He says, this is a Conservative Party tweet he's responding to, and the Conservative Party tweet says, our allies don't think that it's safe to work with Huawei, but the Liberals think it's a good idea to spend $4.8 million to partner with Huawei. And I think it's a good idea to hire Huawei to run my war room campaign. I'm Aaron O'Toole, right? My goodness. It's funny. It's funny at how badly they're misstepping, except that who's going to show up to vote for it? Like, people didn't show up to vote for Andrew Scheer enough to beat Justin Trudeau. And Bernier wasn't the difference maker. I don't care what anybody wants to, if they want to lay it at Bernier's feet or anything like that. It didn't make a difference. People weren't showing up for Andrew Scheer because the policies were bad. And they're not going to show up for Aaron O'Toole because he's not liked, he's not known, and the policies are bad. They're going to show up for Trudeau because he's divisive and he's got his base, and the base is very large. And the base is the Greens, and the base is the NDP, and the base is the Liberals. And there's nothing we can do about that. And there are conservatives who are sitting around saying it's not that bad. It's not so bad. I don't mind being locked at home. I don't mind the loss of civil liberties. And I'm pretty sure that white people are the reason that the world is a disastrous place. Like, that's the real life opinion of some conservatives in Canada. I don't know, but it's true, right? And they're sitting here completely demoralized and with no party to actually trust to vote for. Nobody's showing up for Erin O'Toole. I'm sorry. They don't have a good slate of candidates. They don't have passionate speakers who are compelling. They don't have people like, I like to watch really wonky policy discussions. I like to watch interviews with people. I like to hear how people think. I watch videos in 2 times speed while I'm doing other things because I'm crazy. But I listen to the most boring, ridiculous things. I was listening to the entire parliamentary ombudsman testimony while I was waiting for to do the presentation in the boardroom at the Board of Health. Like, it's ridiculous the things I'll listen to. And I can't find a speech that I'm interested in listening to Erin O'Toole for more than like 2 minutes. I'm sorry, it's pandering ridiculousness. It's like watching the news. I'm not going to watch to be propagandized to. Sorry, guys. Bullshit. And I'm not doing it. Right? And so I sit and I watch other things that are actually talking about the real world that we're living in instead of Erin O'Toole's fantasy vaccine world. Sorry, man. Nobody's showing up for Erin O'Toole. Right? Like, and not to underline it too much, but get a freaking clue. Right? Oh my goodness. Okay. Line 5. Listen. This is actually good news. And I think this Liberal government is absolutely, completely terrible. But I think that they know that they will lose Ontario if this breaks. If this thing breaks, if Line 5 goes down, Liberals will never win again. They'll never, because it'll be worse than the 1995 NDP debacle, right? Like the NDP saying the Ray days and having those days taken away from public servants. My dad was so angry at that. He's like, I'll never vote NDP again. Those lying SOBs. And fair enough, right? Like you can't do that to people without a warning, or at least telling them it's going to happen before getting a majority and then just ramming it down their throats. But again, if the Liberals let this break, they will be blamed for it. Just like the NDP were blamed for the loss of pay in public servants in 1995. There were other factors. It was a difficult financial period, right? Like 1995 was when the economy, the Canadian economy almost went bankrupt. Like we didn't have enough to cover our debts type deal. Bad situation, right? So there were other things happening, but the people of Ontario blame the NDP. Right or wrong, they blame the NDP. And maybe the NDP was left holding the bag. I don't know, but that's another thing. So I think the Liberals are going to fight for this because they understand the stakes are high. If they lose Ontario, they're never going to win again. Right? They can win Quebec all they want. If they lose Ontario, that's that. Done. Probably. Line 5 is very different from Keystone XL, and Canada will fight hard for it, O'Regan says. The federal government won't let Michigan shut down the Line 5 pipeline, Canada's natural resource minister said Thursday as he dismissed opposition comparison to the thwarted Keystone XL pipeline. Seamus O'Regan sounded almost combative as he vowed to defend the 1,000-kilometer line, which bridges an environmentally sensitive part of the Great Lakes to link Wisconsin with refineries in Sarnia, Ontario. We're fighting for Line 5 on every front, and we're confident in that fight, O'Regan told a special House of Commons committee on the relationship between Canada and the United States. The Enbridge Inc. pipeline carries an estimated 540,000 barrels of oil and natural gas liquids daily and is vital to the energy and employment needs of Ontario, Alberta, and Quebec, as well as northern U.S. states, he added. We are fighting on a diplomatic front, and we are preparing to invoke whatever measures we need to in order to make sure that Line 5 remains operational, he said. The operation of Line 5 is non-negotiable. Because if they lose it, they will be blamed because there won't be anybody else to be blamed. Well, it's not Doug Ford's fault, right? They'll blame Doug Ford. But I think that the people will rightly blame the federal government for bungling this one. And who knows if it's bungled yet, right? But they are threatening Michigan and the Governor Whitmer are threatening to shut it down May 18th. It's a hard date. They're fighting for this. It's not won yet, but it's good news. It's good news. And I mean, like I said yesterday, I would be quite happy to go back to reporting about the 15-minute shows on the terrible governance in our country rather than hour-long shows on the loss of our civil liberties, right? Like I would love to go back to lambasting the wacky crew that is currently at Parliament Hill in the House of Commons, right? Like Seamus and Patty Haydu, like incompetence galore, right? And Trudeau, I mean, my goodness, I would love to go back to that. I would love for all of this ridiculousness to not have to be the thing that we focus on, right? Like honestly, I really would. And if this breaks, then we're in a whole other problem set of problems and a whole other situation, right? Like I talk about an elastic band breaking. Like you can pull it and it'll go back mostly, right? But if it breaks, then it's not going back mostly, right? And if it breaks, that just represents a whole new state of being, right? Like now we're dealing with all new set of problems, and the frameworks that we used previously don't work so well anymore. That's what that implies. Okay, so Dr. Gill had a report released yesterday, and here's Rocco talking about it. CRC has published its latest newsletter with respect to recent media coverage of Dr. Kulvinder Gill and the CPSO attack against her free speech and medical and scientific criticism of the COVID measures. See video at here, and he's got the written newsletter there linked as well. And David Feisman links to the Global News article that I'll show you in just a second, but on January 12th, Fissman says, "We have a tsunami of deaths coming. I'm so sorry. The case-demic rhetoric directly contributed to this tragedy, and I hope there are consequences for this who knowingly pushed disinformation." It's not a well-written tweet. But we didn't have a tsunami of deaths. The deaths were pretty normal, really. I mean, like, in line with normal. I think there's still 37 deaths in Guelph, which is in line with like 20 deaths since January 1, right? So I think that's normal for this time of year, isn't it? Right? Especially like given the age makeup, et cetera. I think this is a normal thing. So it's very interesting when we are having doctors sanctioned for this is the media where the video is. You can find of the what Mr. Galati was talking about there. Here's the Global News article, and this is one of those doctors with pronouns in his bio. If you have a doctor with pronouns in your bio, get a new doctor. But anyway, he says, Gill was cautioned by CPSO for lack of professionalism and failure to exercise caution in her posts on social media, which is irresponsible behavior for a member of the profession and presents a possible risk to public health. They don't say she's wrong. They don't say she's wrong. They said that she failed to exercise caution, right? They didn't say she's wrong. Very interesting legalese, right? So Dr. Kaur says, freedom of speech is one of our charter rights and one of the most fundamental constitutional freedoms. Dr. Gill will continue to speak up about any and all harms to patients and the front lines because she is absolutely on the right side of history. And she's responding to Patrick Phillips' tweet, and he says, if you want your doctors working for you, for science and for truth, then we need freedom of speech for physicians and all health professionals. Without that, we will only be government mouthpieces. My oath is to do no harm and put patients first, not to blindly obey public health. And well done, sir. I appreciate that. And I know there are others who appreciate and stand with the doctors who are standing for our freedoms, and it's very disheartening to see the government trying to crack down on this kind of stuff, right? To silence doctors who are speaking out because of horrific things that are happening to people because of bad policy, because of we're refusing to acknowledge and engage with the fact that we've been misstepping for the entire last year, right? Like the complete reaction to this has been wrong from day one. We have completely cocked it up. And the sooner we say, holy crap, we screwed it up and fix it, the better. The longer we carry on with the wasting money and the testing, the useless testing and the mass insanity that we're putting across the airwaves and through advertisements, the longer all this bullshit carries on, the more pain that will be inflicted through bad policy and refusing to admit the mistake. It's awful. CTV News is reporting an Ontario physician has been issued 3 cautions by the province's Regulatory College for Doctors after her tweets about the COVID-19 pandemic were found to be inappropriate and unprofessional. Not wrong. Not wrong. Not wrong. Notice the legalese, says Tom Quiggin. Nature of the wording. They will not come out and say she's wrong. In other words, she might be right, but she is not adhering to the narrative. Yeah, time to break the narrative and tell public health where to stick it. This is Dr. Kaur as well. I highlighted one of her tweets a few minutes ago. The misogynistic and racist Canadian society we live in makes it pretty obvious who is favored and who is not. White male favoring lockdowns versus brown woman pushing lockdowns or proving lockdowns don't work. Absolutely disgusting, right? So here's the white male. And it says, William Osler, discipline of doctor, an egregious abuse of power. And the decision by the William Osler Health System to strip physician of a medical director role after he criticized the province's handling of COVID-19 is an egregious abuse of power by hospital leadership. The reason, he says, it was because hospital management disliked the public remarks on Twitter about how the province was dealing with COVID-19. So they removed him and they're sanctioning her. I'm not sure how that fills up or lines up with the narrative. Hold on. It's a sympathy piece. That's why. This is a sympathy piece. The poor doctor, he was just saying that we weren't handling it right and we should lock down, blah, blah, blah. And she's being sanctioned, right? Dr. Gill's being sanctioned. Very interesting. Very interesting stuff, I think. Here's the Wellington Advertiser. I presented to the board on the 3rd. On March 4th, Dr. Mercer presented a letter. Mercer asks for compassion and empathy in response to abuse of public health staff. And I thought, are you talking to me? She's not talking to me, but it's interesting. Wellington Different Public Health officials are urging compassion and empathy in response to what they consider bullying and abuse of the public health staff. Like, this is a bit rich. In recent weeks, we have noticed a growing number of aggressive and negative comments directed towards our staff over the phone, via email, and through online comments, stated Medical Officer of Health Dr. Nicola Mercer in a letter to the community. She acknowledged many residents in the region are feeling stress, fear, and pandemic fatigue and are exhausted after a year of living in uncertainty and change. However, she added, there's never an excuse to bully or abuse anyone, including public health staff. That's why I always make sure that I'm very nice. I always try to be very nice. I always say thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I know that I'm combative or maybe talking about difficult things or whatever. I always try and be really nice. I never swear at people. I don't ever want to be rude to people when I'm communicating with them, especially in this context. And I think that it's odd that people would be frustrated and yelling. It's so much more satisfying to be very calm and right. And then, if I'm wrong, I would love for somebody to explain it. I would love for Dr. Mercer to explain exactly how she can justify this to herself, how she can sleep, right? Like I would love to be proven wrong. Honestly, if I'm wrong, great. Then there's one injustice in the world that I just misunderstood and it's not actually occurring. Thank goodness, right? Anyway, regardless, never an excuse to bully anyone, blah, blah, blah. The COVID-19 pandemic has challenged all of us in ways that haven't been seen in most of our lives, Mercer wrote. Supporting our community in this global crisis has been at the heart of everything WDGPH has done over the past year. Staff at our agency continue to work very hard to ensure that the pandemic ends as soon as possible in our region. Right. She asked the residents exercise patience and kindness when dealing with the staff. Treating each other with compassion and empathy is the only way we'll get through this pandemic, she said. Anyone in need of mental health support, blah, 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 blah. You can literally tell these people that they're allowing and instructing people to abuse children and they don't care. But please be nice. Patty Haydu, I'm showing this to you because I think the responses and the response on Twitter is interesting. She says, teachers are unsung heroes of the pandemic, adapting and supporting our kids in very challenging circumstances. We're funding research into how COVID has spread in schools and how it's affecting the mental health of our teachers. People are angry. I'm angry because teachers' unions are using this to further their agenda of smaller classrooms and more teachers, and the Ontario government, to speak just to Ontario, is going along with them. And what about healthcare workers, grocery store workers, people who are working in all of the essential jobs that we're told? Apparently Parliament's not essential. Apparently teaching can be done from home. But if you're a grocery store worker, man, you better go stock those shelves, right? Like, I think that it's just very strange. I think that it's very strange to say the teachers are heroes. Not that I have any ill wish against teachers. I think teachers, people who become teachers, genuinely want to help kids. I worked in schools for a long, long time. I worked with a lot of teachers, and they're genuinely good people for the most part. And there's some genuinely awful teachers. There's some awful, awful people, just like anyone, right? But I don't necessarily think that they're on board with the idea of being heroes or anything like that. I think they just want to be left alone to do the job that they signed up for, not to be a Zoom teacher, right? Like, and this whole kumbaya, your heroes. I hate that bullshit. I can't stand, no, I want to do my job and I want to be left alone and I want to go home and see my family and my friends. And I don't want to play these pretend games of, we're all saving the world together, kumbaya. It's so draining and it's so fake. right? Like it's such a fake thing. And it's like when the administrators come all in and, you're like the work party. Ever watch The Office and it makes you uncomfortable? Actually living through it is way more uncomfortable, right? Like it's just awful. And maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just like anti-society or something like that. I don't know. It always made me uncomfortable. I was always like, okay, yeah, we'll play the game for a few minutes and then I'm going to go. Anyway, a little insight into me. Okay, moving on. COVID. Connecticut becomes first blue state to end all lockdown capacity restrictions. Nearly 60% of Connecticut voters voted Joe Biden just 4 months ago. Sure. But Connecticut is opening. I said yesterday, if the states start opening, we might see movement here. I heard if the states start opening, we might just see the border tighten down and them not open anything up and say, oh, those crazy Americans, they're going to see lots of deaths. Iran was a really nice place prior to the mullahs taking over and the revolution in the late 70s. It was like they had bathing suits and long hair and it looked like a regular city, like a regular place. It didn't look like an authoritarian wasteland. Is anybody else concerned that that could happen here? How many other countries have just been taken over because their populations refuse to stand up and say, no, this is crazy. You're crazy. No, we're not doing this, right? How many, right? As many as 16 states in America have removed the mandatory mask mandate, yet not a single Canadian province or even city has removed our mask mandate. Have Canadian politicians decided they're enjoying their communist takeover far too much? Seems like that a little bit, doesn't it? Joe Biden has responded to Texas and Mississippi's removal of mask mandates and opening up businesses, calling it a big mistake and referring to the moves as Neanderthal thinking. Do you remember when, I think it was Bill Morneau called somebody Neanderthal? There was a woman who got called a Neanderthal, and it was tried to be made into a big deal by Andrew Scheer, I think, and it didn't work out. It was just it was one of those things that was insulting. I'm just interested in the fact that the speech is they're not very creative, right? And so, I'll call them Neanderthals, that'll work. Like, oh, call people who like Donald Trump, Donald Ducks, ha ha ha, that's super funny. It's kind of dumb, right? But I don't know. It's stuck out to me, so I thought I'd mention it. Ontario will decide Friday what level of restrictions to place on 3 COVID hotspots still under strict stay-at-home orders. How about you just use the color-coded system? How about you stop lying to people about the rules, right? Like the agreement between businesses and the government is you facilitate and protect the public so that they can use the facility that I provide. And I'll pay taxes to you to have access to all of that protection that you provide. You don't pay the government to give you permission to open your business. You pay the government for access to the roadways and access to police to, if somebody comes in your bagel shop and screams and yells and takes all your bagels, you can call the police then, right? Because you're paying taxes and, you've got a business license from the city. Everybody understands we're all operating in the same game, but they changed the game. Now they say, oh, well, instead of having a business, if you want a business, you have to have all this plastic stuff up. You have to comply with this. There's going to be inspectors who come in to make sure you're complying with the COVID laws. We're long, remember the elastic band that I was talking about? So we've snapped and now we're in a whole new set of frameworks to work with us. And we're at a point where Ontario will decide Friday what level of restrictions to place on these COVID-19 hotspots that they've decided unilaterally are outside of the regular operating rules for whatever reason. They can't justify it with data. We can't seem to get a court date. We don't seem to have any ability to push back on this. And if we push back on this, you might get a nasty letter from the public health person saying, please stop bullying our public health people, right? You can't do anything about it. So what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? You're just sitting there saying, oh, well, I hope Ontario unilaterally decides to open my business sometime soon. Because, it's very expensive to have these bills for months on end with no customers at all. Right? Right. It is. You don't have a business. You've got bills. That's it. And government loans, free government loans, because it's not free money. You have to pay it back. The free is the interest. We won't charge interest on this money. You can just have it for now. And when you start to pay it back, you'll just be paying back the money you borrowed, not the interest on the money you borrowed. That's what the free loan is. Thanks. When we don't have customers and we've got rent rolling in and nobody coming into the store, what we love is borrowing extra money on top of the rent that we have to pay and on top of all of the other things that we have to pay. And on top of the pink slips, right? You're laid off because we can't afford to pay you because we cannot take customers because the Ontario government refuses to let us. Thanks, the government, right? Oh, please give us more of the government's good choices. Do people? It's frustrating. Anyway, it's frustrating. It's frustrating. Roman Baber saying from March to June, Ontario canceled an estimated 184,000 surgeries and procedures. It's not because of the pandemic, but because of the pandemic response. It's been terrible. The toll in human lives is incalculable. This practice is continuing today. Tell your MPP, friends, colleagues, and neighbours that we are not keeping people healthy and safe. Ontario's healthcare strategy is doing the opposite. Christine Elliott refuses to give me estimates, demand that she and Doug protect LTC homes and restore our healthcare. I think that if I were to run, I may, and I'm not, I don't want to speculate about running in politics or anything like that. But if I were to run, I think, or if I were to vote in a next election, I would only support independent people, and I would only support people who clearly stated, we do not support lockdowns, and we will not have party fealty. Let's work with people who are interested in pushing a Canadians first agenda. Let's take care of the people who are here and stop throwing money away and stop stifling ourselves for nothing. It's just unbelievably bad governance. And when you're in the party structure, you have to shut up about it. You can't say anything about it because otherwise they'll kick you out, right? Roman Baber was a conservative. Randy Hillier was a conservative. Carrie Ollis was a conservative. I can't remember. Christine? Sorry, I forgot it wrong. These people were in caucus. These people were saying, listen, like, this is too much. This is too much. And they're removed from cabinet. So I don't think the party system is helping us get closer to effective representation. And I think that having people who are able to communicate well and push the agenda of let's serve the people, the public, those people should be in office, not people who are weighing the public response to COVID vaccination passports. Speaking of that, we'll get to that in a minute. Here's an educator in England talking about masking. I've been talking about masking and saying that it is child abuse, saying that developmentally there are indications that it is impactful in a negative way. And I would love to see the data about that. I would love to have parents informed about how dangerous and damaging the masking of young children is to their development. But that's not information that we're allowed to have, apparently. And apparently, if you ask public health, they don't like that so much. Here's from the UK. And it says, it's important that primary school children do not wear face coverings, says Public Health England's medical advisor, Dr. Susan Hopkins. She explained that this is because COVID infection rates are low among the age group and wearing face coverings could affect their development. So this is about a minute. I'll start it here. It makes sense. We'll listen to the whole thing.
And in looking at it, we've talked to educationalists, public health and clinical specialists. And the consensus view is very strongly to not advise school children at primary school age to wear face coverings. This for two reasons. One is that they can have difficulties wearing them and keeping them on all day. And the second part of that is that it's really important that they can see facial expressions in order to develop their communications and language skills. Schools have delivered a lot of measures to reduce the risk in schools, and additional plans to test families of primary school children will also be in place as schools go back.
I think she's covered it there. I think that it's interesting that we recognize that there's developmental issues. We as humans recognize there are developmental issues, but the medical apparatus in Canada doesn't seem to care. They don't care, and they don't want you to talk about it. Don't talk about it. It's a little uncomfortable. We'll get uncomfortable, and then we'll ignore you, right? We'll all fidget in our chairs while you're talking about it. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization, NACI, have said that they are going to extend the Moderna and Pfizer and AstraZeneca. Basically, they just said the COVID vaccines to 4 months because of how much protection the first one gives you. And everybody was super okay with this. They said the NACI were on board, right? And the national, and you can see their disclosures and affiliations, right? You can see who's giving them money, right? So that's interesting. I'm not going to go through the disclosures and stuff at this point in time, but these are the people on this board, and it's very interesting to see who's giving the money. So it's interesting to me that they would put their names. Here's the CTV News article from yesterday, from the 3rd. Second dose of COVID-19 vaccines can be given up to 4 months after first, NACI now says. So they're putting their names to this, but Pfizer says no. Pfizer won't sign off on delaying second dose of vaccine. Yesterday, I talked a lot about, like, what do they say? Maybe we should have a study that looks at efficacy of this before we decide that we could just wait 4 months, right? And so Pfizer Canada, this is the Montreal Gazette yesterday, Pfizer Canada has refused to sign off on Quebec's plan to wait 4 months before administering the second dose of the company's vaccine against COVID-19. The province announced on Wednesday it was changing its dosing schedule from 3 to 4 months because it wants to vaccinate as many people as possible as quickly as possible. He justified the decision to further delay the time between the first and second doses of vaccines by citing new public health recommendations and an evolution of scientific knowledge. However, a spokesperson for Pfizer Canada said the safety and efficacy of its vaccine has not been evaluated on different dosing schedules because most participants received the second dose 21 days after the first. Health authorities can alter dosing intervals as the pandemic evolves, but the company maintains there are no data to demonstrate that protection after the first dose is sustained after 21 days. Crazy, right? Crazy. Here's Laurie Goldstein. He says, on Friday, Sun Media editorial, politicians must own their pandemic blunders. The mistake by the federal government of not securing timely vaccine supplies, which now have a ripple effect through the country, prolonging the pandemic. Because of this, the federal and provincial governments are ignoring their own previously stated best practices. They're moving away from the original plan to vaccinate Canadians twice within the time periods recommended by vaccine manufacturers to delay the second dose for up to 4 months, far beyond what they previously advised. Clearly, this new policy has been born out of desperation to give as many people as possible one dose of the vaccine in a race to contain COVID-19. But this is not an ideal situation. It's not what our government told us was the best policy until it changed that policy this week. It's making the best of a bad situation caused by a government mistake on an equal scale to people not following basic public health recommendations during the pandemic. I responded to Laurie and I said, I don't think so, man. I don't think so. I said, hold on, I'll get my tweet. This is what I said. I said, so the government ignores the manufacturer's dose schedule and comes up with its own completely without any evidence and pushes ahead anyway, and you're okay with it? Not acceptable. And the reason I think he's okay, I thought he was okay with it, he responded and said, I'm not okay with it. That's the opposite of what I said. But he says here, it is making the best of a bad situation caused by a government mistake, and he's blaming the public for public health, the people not following public health recommendations during the pandemic. I don't think any of that's true. That's not true. And it doesn't help, like, what they're doing. Like, it's not making the best of a bad situation. Like, you're taking an untested vaccine and you're changing the dosing schedule. That's criminal. Like, that's not making the best of a bad situation. Like, it's not. It's making it worse. It's making it worse. Dan Kelly yesterday. Okay, there's another tweet I'm missing. Hold on. Okay, so yesterday I came across this thread from Dan Kelly, and he says, with Canadian vaccine rollouts finally accelerating, we need our political leaders to dedicate time to looking at critical questions related to COVID recovery. We have no time to spare if we want to minimize the economic damage. Questions include, at what stage can we end all business restrictions? When can governments end stay-at-home advice and encourage Canadians to return to offices, dining, events, theater, and travel? What will trigger the reopening of the Canada-US border? Will we allow foreign tourists, or at least those fully vaccinated, to come to Canada this summer? Will the province's feds issue reduced restrictions or issue vaccine passports allowing Canadians to travel across the country or abroad? And this is what I responded to. I was like, hard no, hard pass. Don't advocate for this garbage. And so this morning, I saw this tweet. Yesterday, I spoke to the Star about ways to open Canada to tourism as quickly as possible. I asked if government will ban fully vaccinated U.S. tourists this summer and suggested Canada consider a vaccine passport to cross borders. I received a lot of feedback. Many people, including several small business owners, but shared their concerns with vaccine passports in general. Some have said that governments should not set any policy based on who is vaccinated or not, even for visitors to Canada. Others think we need to keep the border fully closed. Please note that my goal is to ensure we are thinking ahead to ensure we can open our economy as quickly and widely and safely as possible. Governments need to consider alternatives to lockdown and closures. We also need to find ways to eliminate interprovincial restrictions and ensure Canadians can travel across our wonderful country, especially as millions of us will be vaccinated prior to the summer. As always, CFIB will survey our members to determine their views on vaccine passports and other policy measures. While I was trying to ensure this issue was put on the public policy agenda, I will wait for our member data before expressing a perspective. you could possibly express a perspective on vaccine passports, but I think that it's interesting that the pushback was enough that he responded to it. So that's worthwhile. At least people are saying no. Here's an interesting situation. We are aware that in Toronto, officers are being given a direction to arrest on the obstruct justice charge simply as a means of obtaining ID. They are then releasing on a provincial offences ticket and not pursuing an obstruct charge. This could be considered abusive process, and they give the case to cite in this abusive process. In 1993, there was somebody arrested for obstruct, but they weren't getting obstruct. They were charged with obstruct, but the obstruct charge wasn't appropriate, and they were using that to bridge to another one, so it couldn't stick. It couldn't stand. So I think that that's interesting, and I think that good for Police on Guard for Thee for putting out information like that. It's information like that if you don't know it and you don't have a lawyer that knows it, and you're being represented, it's the kind of thing that could get you could totally have the charges removed, but if you're not aware of it, then and can't advocate for it, then you wouldn't know, unless you had somebody worth their salt in doing that, unless you had an expensive lawyer who knew their stuff and knew of that case, right? And maybe that's standard case law. Maybe it is. I don't know. Yesterday, I thought this was interesting. Canadian forces say trans women are women. Ottawa Public Health says trans women are women. Pass it on. Sizzle says women hold the word women in trust for our daughters. We will not give up the meaning because a handful of males have decided in the absence of any evidence that how they feel is what a woman feels. Males who identify as trans don't get to tell a woman what a woman is. And I think that that's interesting. I think that that's all interesting. Here is March 2019, Zuby, he's a rapper. I follow him on Twitter. He's an interesting guy, smart dude. He garnered worldwide attention by posting a video in which he claimed to have broken the British women's deadlift record of 238 kilograms, 525 pounds. That's a big deadlift. Zuby claimed that he identified as a woman while lifting the weight. Zuby later declared on Twitter that he took the UK women's bench press record too. Now, Twitter's going to demonetize this video just because I'm doing this segment. I think that that's funny and kind of sad. But I think that it brings up a really interesting point. We've got Canadian forces. We've got Ottawa Public Health. We've got institutions pushing the changing of the definition of the word women to include men. And I think that that's weird. I think that that's an odd, strange thing to live through, right? In the era of follow science and public health, we've got people who 197% can predict the climate of the Earth from 100 years into the future. The same people who predicted that Montana would have no glaciers and that snow was going to be extinct by 2016, I think Al Gore said. I mean, those people definitely know their predictions, right? And the same people are saying we have to follow the science with regards to gender. There are hundreds of genders. And the same people are saying, and now institutions are saying, echoing what these people who've been proven wrong about their predictions about snow and been proven wrong about other things too. They're saying that trans women, men who identify as women, are women. Redefining the word and inserting men in there, into women. It's weird. It's weird. I think that it's not appropriate. Sad news to finish the show, but I mean, not the existential sad news of your country is imploding in front of you, just regular day-to-day sad news. Wayne Gretzky's dad passed away. And the statement that he put out is touching, and I'm not going to read it because I'll choke up a little bit if I do. But it is very, very sad. But I'm sure that Mr. Gretzky lived a long and very fulfilling life. And it's nice when people who live long and fulfilling lives get remembered by their kids. That's the usual thing. That's the way of things. That's how it's supposed to go, right? There's no tragedy there. So there's a lot of love and a lot of respect for the elder Gretzky, and my deepest condolences, Mr. Wayne Gretzky. And yeah, man, life is fleeing and difficult, and every day is a struggle. So make sure that you enjoy the people around you while they're there, because they may not be. Right? They may not be. And outside of our control, outside of all of our control. So be thankful for every day you've got. Okay? All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out SpeakingMoistly.co. And have a wonderful, wonderful